This is the Dozuki workshop series. We're so thankful to have you with us. My name's Kate Emma Smith. I'm the Dozuki hostess, and I'm so glad if you're returning from our last installments of photography and engaging your employees. We're really excited today to talk about ISO, and I'm here with our expert for the September workshop, JF DeBetz. And thank you so much, JF, for being here.
No, thank you. Yeah.
So again, today's workshop is called Achieving and Maintaining ISO Compliance with Dilbert, and you'll see what we mean very shortly. But again, for those of you who do not know me, Director of Outreach and Workshop Hostess, feel free to contact me about any of the things that we do on the workshop, as well as anything about Dozuki or the experts that we have here with us today. And JF, if you can maybe introduce yourself.
My name is JF DeBetz. I'm CEO and Process Improvement Specialist for the Business Fixers. And we basically specialize in quality improvement and helping companies with ISO 9000 certification, as well as Six Sigma and other process improvement and management consulting activities. So
Great. Thank you again.
You're welcome.
And just before we get started, for those of you who know, we always love having folks engage during the workshop, not just after or before. So if you have any questions throughout the next 45 minutes to an hour that we're together, just feel free to type out your questions in the message field of the GoToWebinar interface. And then here you'll also find mine and JF's email addresses. And so feel free to contact us either directly at any time with comments, questions, feedback, whatever it is. You can find me at kate@dozuki.com and jf@debetz.charter.com. So thank you so much, and feel free to have those questions coming out. So let's begin. Today's workshop roadmap, just so you folks know, we're going to be covering a variety of different things on ISO. And so you can see kind of the seven major markers that we're going to have throughout this journey of ours on ISO. And definitely we want to start at the beginning, the basics. So what are we talking about when we talk about ISO? So JF, what is ISO? Just for those folks who want to know.
Yeah, ISO actually stands for International Standards Organization, and it's basically a methodology to ensure that you're basically having consistent processes for either product or service at your company. So in other words, if you're producing a product, you're producing the same product of the same quality every single time, and the same if you're doing service. Standards were set a long time ago. Actually, this started about 25 years ago out of the UK. It's a requirement for a lot of people to do business in the UK is to be ISO certified. So anyway, that's kind of the history of ISO, and there's definitely different standards that we're going to talk about today.
Great, thank you. And three of those standards that I think we wanted to kind of just kick off with are the most well-known. We've got ISO 9100, is that how we say it?
It's ISO 9001.
9001.
This is the most common standard, mm-hmm. and what most people get certified to. It's good for any type of product or service. We also are going to talk just a little bit about ISO 14001, which mm-hmm. is an environmental standard that's specific for companies that need to meet regulatory requirements that would involve that. And then if you're in the aerospace industry, you'll be familiar with ISO 9100, mm-hmm. which is extremely similar to ISO 9001, but there's some specifics for aerospace.
Definitely. And we're going to be focusing, perhaps not on the aerospace today, but certainly the quality management, because at least in your experience, you found that that's probably the most popular that people need to be aware of.
Absolutely. If you're mm-hmm. ISO 9001 certified, there's not much more to do to get the other two, but mm-hmm. Most people go for the ISO 9001.
Great. So let's talk about that. So quality management, again, kind of what you were alluding to earlier, you said standardization, just making everything, your product and your processes are top notch.
Exactly.
Okay.
ISO 9001 basically involves having a quality management system mm-hmm. in place in your company and having that system documented. Mm-hmm. The benefits of that are obviously you can enhance customer satisfaction, and then you will achieve continual improvement on both your processes for your products as well as your services.
Great. And then for environmental management, you said, again, another very popular one.
Another very popular one. This one is specific for people that might specifically work with nuclear power, those sort of things. It's to enable you to conform to regulatory requirements that the government might impose. It also talks about continual achievement, continual improvement in the environmental processes. and you want to minimize any sort of harmful effects on the environment. So there are some standards in place that companies need to be certified if they're dealing with those kind of chemicals.
Definitely.
And such. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I assume this is kind of a more, it's growing in popularity.
It's growing in popularity quite a bit, yeah.
Yeah. I imagine so. With all the kind of social and political pressures that companies are getting these days, I'd imagine that it would be pretty much in demand at least.
It's growing in pretty much all companies.
Okay. And I've heard the term generic standards thrown around a lot. Maybe you could just touch upon maybe that key phrase a bit.
Yeah, so generic standards, ISO 9001 and 14001 are generic standards. What that means is it will apply to any company, large or small, and whatever product or service you provide. It really doesn't matter. The standard can be applied to basically any company. And any business. I've done it to waitresses at a restaurant all the way to big Fortune 500 companies.
Oh wow, that's quite a range.
Yes, quite a range.
Definitely. Okay, so management systems though. So in order to get ISO certified, I know we've talked about putting in place a management system.
Yes.
So what does that look like exactly? If we can kind of define what that means.
Okay. Yeah. I mean that's a big question, but yeah, to put together basically a management system would require management support, and basically you have to create how it is you're going to build your product or how it is you're going to sell your service. Kind of want to talk a little bit about this Dilbert cartoon where it talks about we don't care how bad our processes are as long as they're documented and used consistently. That is a little bit of a criticism that ISO sometimes gets, is that it's all about documentation. That actually is not the case. There is no specific requirement for ISO on how to document. There are specific requirements that you are focused on continual improvement. So, but what people tend to do is over-document, and that's why the Dilbert one is kind of tongue-in-cheek.
Yeah, sometimes less is more, perhaps.
Less is often more.
Great, and we'll definitely get to those kind of common mistakes and talk about that a little more to answer some of those questions. Yes. But so what I guess the takeaways for at least a good management system is satisfying the customer,
yes,
complying to regulations, and then also, if you can see on your screen, meeting those environmental objectives.
Exactly.
Certainly.
Exactly.
And so then when we're talking about systemizing, this is another key word that we want to make sure everybody is on the same page with. If you could maybe expound on that.
Yeah, basically we talk about that large companies in particular, but small as well, really cannot operate very well without a management system. And the larger a company gets, the more important that management system becomes. I've seen a lot of startups fail because as they grow, they didn't put the management systems in place. If you work to set up that management system from the get-go, you're going to be much better off for the future. You'll have your processes documented. Everybody knows what to do. If somebody wins the lotto, somebody else can come in the next day and pick up their job and be able to do it. That's what we're trying to get by systemizing everything.
Right. Yeah. And so I guess our takeaways for that would be nothing important is left out. Certainly not. You don't want to leave out any critical information. And I know definitely responsibility of kind of everyone's objectives, tasks.
Yeah, in fact, the second bullet here is really key. It's who is responsible for doing what, when, how, why, and where. And if you got all of those covered, and that's what we always ask people when we go in and do an assessment is, who does what, why do they do it, when do they do it?
Yeah.
Getting that clearly defined so everybody in the company knows what that is really important.
Absolutely, and that's probably a tricky thing.
But not as easy to do, right?
Oh yeah,
exactly.
I was gonna say
it's tricky to do.
Definitely allocating responsibilities is a little tough. There always seems to be, at least from stories that you hear that I've heard, is that's always kind of where the tricky aspects come into is kind of who's doing what. And then again, the last point that we wanted to show you guys, management system standards provide an international state-of-the-art model to follow. So what the model that you're referring to?
Yeah, the model would be actually the ISO standard. So the standard allows you to have a model in your company that not only you understand, but other companies around the world understand.
Yeah.
So we all can talk the same language with ISO 9000. So we all know what an ISO 9000 company looks like. We are more comfortable doing business with another ISO 9000 company.
Certainly.
We know that the processes are in place and that there at least are some controls in place to ensure that continual the same product every time.
Right. And I think you were mentioning earlier, it's like ISO is used in many different countries, not
Many
just
different countries.
In maybe the Western world, but also Eastern. So it's good to be all on the same standard.
Yes,
Absolutely.
yes,
So one thing I was really curious about that we mentioned in our talks earlier, you mentioned processes but not products, and I had never really thought of making that distinction.
Yes.
And so why is it important that we do make that distinction?
Yeah, it's very good point, because a lot of people think ISO is only if you make a product. And ISO is actually not about product at all. It's about product or service. ISO focuses on what are the processes. What are the processes in your company? How do you take an order? How do you fulfill a customer complaint? How do you produce the product? How do you sell your service? All of that. We're actually only looking at processes, not looking at product. And we're also looking at how you measure those processes so that we know that the service and the product meets the customer standards.
Certainly. So moving on to certifications, kind of another mile marker within our roadmap today. Certifications, I've heard certifications, requirements, registrations, there's a lot going on there. And sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to parse out these terms, especially when for the folks in the audience who are just entering the ISO world.
And I will say that about half the companies I work with are trying to go for certification. The other half are really just trying to be ISO ready.
Okay.
So maybe they don't have the requirement, or they don't sell overseas a lot that they need that standard, but they realize that that's going to be coming as they grow. You can get huge benefits from being ISO ready versus being ISO certified. So I like to use the term ISO compliant.
Compliant, yes.
So are your processes ISO compliant?
Right.
And then if you want to do certification after that, to be honest, it should be a piece of cake and a breeze, because you're already ISO compliant.
You're already there. So I guess what is the difference between certification and maybe registration? Right.
Well, they're kind of the same thing.
Okay.
If you get certified, then a third party, so you can't get certified from within yourself.
Right.
So a third party will come and assess you and determine whether you are compliant with the ISO standards.
Okay.
You do pay somebody to do that, and then they come back every 1 to 3 years to make sure that you are recertified.
Okay, 1 to 3 years.
1 to 3 years.
Okay.
Yes.
Got it.
Yeah. So that's kind of how that works.
And like you were kind of saying before, just to reiterate, certification is not a requirement, though?
It's not a requirement.
Okay.
It depends. It depends.
Okay.
Some customers require their suppliers to be ISO certified. I see that significantly, particularly like in aerospace. But some companies don't.
Right.
So it just depends. A lot of companies will ask you if you're ISO certified, and if you're not, they'll say, well, do you have a plan to be ISO certified?
Yeah.
Or they'll want to come in and do their own audit to see that you're ISO compliant, even if you're not certified. Again, it's kind of up to the company, and they need to decide that for themselves, whether or not it makes sense.
Okay.
So,
Then that leads us to the excellent point, is what's the decision-making process? What would be kind of why you would want to become certified? And I guess I would be curious, is it better to wait on certification? If you don't need it, then don't do it. Or is it better to just bite the bullet and get certified just to cover your bases? What's kind of strategically, I know it's a large paintbrush, but
right. The problem that often happens is by the time people realize that they need ISO certification, they're kind of at that last point.
Yeah.
So they have to get it, and then they have to bring in somebody to help them, get it quickly. If you can start early, while your company is still growing, then I think you have time to really build those processes and make them ISO compliant from the get-go, which will make certification a breeze. But yeah, it's not required to be ISO certified.
Okay.
Unless it's something that each company has to decide for themselves.
Right. Yeah.
But
absolutely.
the benefits are huge. So.
Definitely. And so kind of just to show, I guess maybe some of the main things to look for in this decision. If it's a requirement of the market that you're in.
Right. The market might require it. Your customer might require it for supplier certification. That's often the case.
Yeah.
I particularly see that. It might be part of a risk management program with you or your customer. It will also motivate the staff by setting a common goal.
Yeah.
And that's really key. I actually spend a lot of my time just helping companies set goals that meet business objectives.
Yeah.
That travel all the way down from the CEO to the person on the line. Then they have to connect.
Yeah. At the very least, it's getting everyone on the same page.
Getting everybody on the same page.
The responsibilities, like we said earlier. So certainly lot of food for thought to think about if you are considering going forward with an ISO project for sure. So what is ISO not? That's something maybe we want to kind of mention just for people to understand what you're not going to be getting out of going through an ISO process.
Yes. Like I said, ISO stands for International Standards Organization. ISO itself, the people that run the standard do not actually do the certification. That's all done by third party. ISO comes up with the ISO requirements, but somebody else has to certify. Again, it's that third party. So ISO doesn't issue the certificates. They don't, accredit certification bodies either. So you have to do your research to make sure your certification body is a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there are a lot of different ISO standards that you've mentioned.
Yes.
And I didn't know this. I have very little background in ISO, but apparently there's a whole family of them.
There's a whole family of them.
Yeah, so maybe we can just kind of an overview of the family.
Absolutely. I'll focus on the main one, which is ISO 9001. 2008.
2008.
And the 2008 indicates the last time it was revised.
Okay.
There is a new one, just so you know, there is a new one coming in 2015.
Oh, okay.
However, if you're already certified to 2008, you'll just have the new additional requirements, whatever those may be. But right now, ISO 9001 2008 is the latest, and that's what people are getting certified to.
Right.
It's the only standard in the ISO 9000 family that can be used for certification. Therefore, it is the most common one that I see.
Do you, you said, it changes, evolves, the standard every once in a while, certainly, again, 2008, now 2015.
Yes. It's every 7 years approximately that they do it. 2001 was the one prior to this. The changes are usually not significant, but, it's trying to keep up with the changes in the world and requirements, and typically it gets a little bit more specific, a little bit more focused on continual improvement. Exactly.
Great. So we definitely, for those of you who are in the audience, we're going to be putting out a poll, and we'd love to get kind of just an idea of where everyone is at in the room. So we're just going to be asking about which type of standards you are pursuing, or you have already kind of checked, approved for, just to see where everybody's at. So if you'll see that pop up in your screen, don't worry, you'll see us again after you've responded. But okay, cool. So the changes, though, you said in standardization are not significant. Again,
they typically aren't.
I
can't say because they aren't ready yet for 2015. But the 2008 ones were not significant changes from 2001. If anything, they were major improvements.
Okay.
So yeah, they're just gonna, as everything, right? The whole point of this is to have a quality management system where you continually improve. Well, ISO needs to do the same.
Yeah. So. Absolutely. And do you recall what that change was?
They got a little bit more specific on supplier requirements.
Okay.
And working with your customers. So they went a little bit further than just the internal processes. That was the main things, but there were quite a few.
Right. And so then let's just talk a little bit about the 16 other standards in a family that can help an organization or on specific aspects. So 16 of them. That's very specific.
There's 16 other standards, and we're not going to talk about those very specifically, just because most of those are just standards you can look up, and they're usually more for reference because you don't get certified with those. But they can talk about how to do auditing, training, performance improvement. It's kind of the guideline that you can use for those.
Right. Okay.
But yeah, the main focus is certainly ISO 9001.
Yeah, definitely. This is definitely a rabbit hole that if it were not a crash course, we could certainly get into. But since it is, we're just going to cover our next point, business benefits. So not just only communicating internationally, things like that, but you've seen some companies really kind of overhaul and change their businesses.
I have, and I want to talk a little bit about this Dilbert slide, just because it talks about one of the requirements of ISO 9000 is that you're audited every year.
Okay.
And it talks about, this cartoon is pretty clever. It talks about putting all of the non-conforming documents in the trunks of our car. And what I do see quite often, and it's unfortunate, is oftentimes people will hire people like myself to come in right before an audit to help make sure that they're they're ready, that they haven't sloughed off. Well, I always go back and really go back to their processes and see what they have documented, because if they have to do all this catch up every time they have an audit, then that means the processes weren't documented correctly.
Yeah.
And it usually means that they've over documented them. So, this is very tongue in cheek, of course, but it's very true. It is a voluntary audit. So you actually want them to come in and see what your issues are.
Yeah.
You don't want to hide your issues from the auditors, because they are actually there to help you, not to slap your hand.
Yeah.
That's a big misconception with ISO 9000.
Interesting. Yeah. It's very tempting to say, oh, look over here.
Yeah, people don't want to show their dirty laundry, but to
Right,
be honest,
right.
the point of ISO is to show your dirty laundry and then get help to improve that.
Definitely. You don't want to kind of come up years later and just get in a little bit in trouble.
Exactly.
Not great. So there are tons and tons of business benefits that JF and I have talked about, and we wanted to show you quite the rich and healthy list of them. But don't worry, we are not going to go through all of them, but just kind of highlighting some of the key ones that we found probably the most important, the most pertinent.
Exactly. I mean, everything on this list, of course, is fantastic benefits from implementing ISO 9000. So we wanted to have the whole list for Kate to show, but I wanted to just kind of focus on a few. And one is that you have an international consensus, so everybody's on the same page, whether you're dealing with Europe, China, Australia. It doesn't matter. Everybody's on the same page. Everybody understands the same standard. It's great for doing B2B, business to business. Okay, whether it's international or within.
Right.
People can use ISO 9000 for supplier certification, for example.
Yeah, and I imagine it's great because even if you aren't international right now, if your business wants to grow,
most every company wants to be international.
Yeah.
So yeah, exactly.
Yes, it's good to look ahead, definitely.
Exactly. And then the whole point of all of this is satisfying customers.
Right.
So, are you meeting your customer demands and even maybe going beyond that? Are you providing extra value to your customers? If not, why are you in business? Complying with government regulations, that's specifically key for the ISO 14001. And then integrate with the global economy. Technical support for regulations. In other words, you have some sort of resource that you can go to on what those requirements are.
Definitely.
And then it's a fantastic tool for new economic players. Like I talked about a startup. This is a fantastic tool for startups to use. Fantastic. And it's the best time to get in on it.
Yeah.
And then very, very key with ISO, which is what you hear almost from more than anything else, is that it's documented. You have a consistently followed and maintained documented system. Most of those are now done online.
Right.
We used to have to do everything on paper. Thank goodness we've moved to the computer age.
Yeah.
It also helps for updates.
Yeah, none of those bulky binders and
Yes,
PDF forms anymore.
Exactly. Now you can use Dozuki software or whatever to help you do
I
that.
swear, those are meant to be dropped and spilled everywhere.
Exactly.
Certainly. And then again, you said consistent quality.
Absolutely. So you're producing the same product and the same service every time.
Definitely.
So if somebody buys from you today and somebody buys from you tomorrow, they're getting the very same product or the same service. And that's what they want.
Well, we definitely got our poll results back, so thank you to everyone who responded. So just to take a moment just to acknowledge where everyone's at. So again, the question was, which ISO standards apply to you? And we were looking at the three that we introduced in the beginning, the 9001, the environmental, which was 1400 is?
14,001 is the environmental, yes.
And then also for you crazy aerospace kids who might have gotten in here. So it is a whopping 87% for quality, 35% for the environmentals, and then also the 9%, the aerospace, you're in here. So that's kind of where we're at with the floor. It's perhaps what you projected it would be.
It is. I predicted about 90% would be ISO 9001.
Yeah.
So
good call. We should have taken bets on that.
I should have taken bets on that, yeah.
Definitely.
And the environmental one continues to increase.
Great,
It used to be, 10 years ago, it was very, very small. So, yeah.
No, not surprising again with kind of all these pressures of getting just greener and more environmentally friendly, certainly. And we also do, before we get to kind of our next portion in the presentation, Martha Carreno has a fantastic question. she's asking, what is the cost of becoming certified? And approximately, does it make sense for a smaller business, maybe who is caring about a budget, I assume, things like that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and of course I expected this question. Unfortunately, it doesn't have a simple answer because the cost of becoming certified is very much dependent on the size of the company, which certification that they're going for,
Right.
and where they're located. So all of that it can range, to be very honest, from about $1,500 to $30,000 depending on the size of a company. Does it make sense for a small company? I think what makes sense for a small company is to become ISO compliant first, and then look if you need to be ISO certified.
Yeah.
The nice thing is if you start at that level, the certification process in a sense will become cheaper because you shouldn't need as much consulting and hand-holding to get you to that certification point. So the earlier you start, the less it's going to cost.
Okay. And then maybe perhaps a follow-up question, at least for my curiosity. You said every 7 years the standard maybe upgrades itself.
It upgrades itself.
Is for those who are already certified and just have to make the small adjustments. Does that cost additional to get recertified?
It does not. It actually does not cost additional.
Okay.
All that will happen was they'll let the companies know here's the new requirements coming out. They'll, of course, there's some sort of lead period, so you might have a year or such to get your stuff up to that standard, and then it just replaces your other standard.
Okay, great.
So whoever your certifying body will just come in and now certify you to whatever the new standard is.
Right. So you're not having to worry about every 7 years dishing
Not
out that 15 to 30 grand.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're very good about letting you know what's coming.
Great.
And giving you the time needed to make that.
Yeah.
They aren't going to say, hey, you don't meet the requirements all of a sudden. They're going to give you that time to change anything.
That would be pretty horrifying to have to deal with all the time.
Yeah.
Okay, so some of the meat that I know that you guys have been waiting for, elements of a successful ISO. So there's got to be a lot.
There's a lot.
Definitely.
And I know this looks like a very large list, and it is. These are actually all elements from ISO 9000. So if you actually looked at the standard for ISO 9000, you'll see all of this in here. I'm not going to read through all these because it's a lot, but every one of these is key. Every one of these is what auditors will assess you against. Ones that absolutely are key to work are management commitment. If your management isn't committed to creating a quality management system, this will never work. And I will tell you, this is the number one reason why ISO fails, is the lack of management commitment.
No.
Quality policy. Everybody in your company needs to understand what your quality policy, and it can be something as simple as like customer satisfaction is our number one priority, for example. But everybody in the company needs to understand that. The first thing auditors ask when they go in is, what is the quality policy? And they will ask every employee that, and every answer needs to be the same.
Pop quizzes, you guys. What's your quality policy?
So everybody needs to understand that. Again, that's part of that management commitment. And then resource management. How are you setting up resources? Is it clearly defined who does what, how, when, and why? Kind of what we talked about earlier. Very key. Product realization. The nice thing about ISO is it covers you from the time you concept an idea all the way to you implementing the product or sale. So it's the entire product realization process is looked at, and there's standards for that.
Great. Yeah.
Any customer-related processes. So sometimes you have processes within your company that are specifically related to your customer. It addresses that as well as your own internal ones. And then a big key one here is control of non-conforming product or service. What happens when your product or your service doesn't meet the requirements?
Oh.
ISO makes sure that you don't mix non-conforming products in with conforming ones. Yeah. And the same with your service.
Yeah, that sounds like a good hefty point to keep in mind.
Those are kind of the key ones.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, again, just so for the folks who know, again, these slides will be available right after filming and everything. So if you're trying to write these down really quickly, don't worry about it. These slides are free and available to all of you folks who came out with us today. So these lists are really great to have. And again, probably a little overwhelming, but again, we wanted to point out kind of the main ones, and definitely management commitment. I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because that seems to be definitely a pitfall for some people.
Absolutely,
so.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And any of these, if you go and look at the standard, it will go into very specific detail on every one of these points.
Great.
So.
Great, definitely. So for those who want to go in more depth, don't worry. The resources, we'll shoot those out to you. So then I guess the next question that everybody, the $1 million question, or perhaps maybe the $30,000 question, if we're going a little more specific, is how do I set up an ISO ready system for my company? It's really daunting, and this seems like there's such a kind of rabbit hole of a process of a project to do. So what would you say towards that?
Yeah, I mean, there's different ways, of course, to approach this. My experience in doing this 25 years is the best way to get ISO ready is to actually have an initial assessment. It's usually better to bring somebody in from the outside who knows a little bit about this, but you might even be able to do it yourself. But you need to actually have somebody come in, look at your organization, whether it's your department or your entire company, and see where you actually are. ISO consultants know the right questions to ask in terms of who's doing what, who's doing, when, why, all of those, and they'll look at your documentation or lack of and tell you what you need to do. Most people who don't have a good understanding of ISO will absolutely overdo it, and they'll over document, and they'll think the requirement is more than it is. If you really understand the requirement of ISO, it isn't very specific on what you need to do.
Okay.
It gives you a guideline, but what you decide to do within that guideline is up to you. So what I've typically done is help companies actually streamline their processes before they're documented. So if you have somebody come in, do an initial assessment to see where you're at, then you can kind of determine how far you need to go, what it's going to cost from that point, that sort of thing. So the initial assessment, I think, is absolutely key.
Okay. Yeah. Got to start on the right foot.
Start on the right foot.
Absolutely. And so then the next points to keep in mind, action.
Right. Once you have that assessment plan, then you can do an action plan. And that actually may be where you decide if you want to be ISO compliant or ISO certified. And then if you're ready, if you want to go to certification, then you get a third party. Then you need to hire a third party. You also need to set up within your organization, and I always encourage people to do this within their organization, have somebody come in and help you do this, set up your own internal audit function.
Okay. Ooh,
so that you...
sounds intimidating.
Yeah, it sounds intimidating.
Yeah.
But, wouldn't you rather have your own internal audit function that looks at what the way your processes are? Right. And it's really easy to do. It doesn't have to be full-time people. It can be people who just is part of their job. Okay. And it also doesn't have to be the same people, because you can't audit yourself. So, for example, a purchasing person can't audit the purchasing department.
Okay.
But, you can get somebody from sales to come over and audit the purchasing, and vice versa. Yeah. Just, it's just kind of giving you that other person's look from the outside. So anyway, that would be a good thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And so again, you kind of mentioned the outside consultant. I guess, is there a strategy to finding this outside consultant? Or?
There's a lot out there. I would, of course, I am a consultant, so this is a tough one for me. But my problem with consultants is you don't want a consultant that never leaves. You want a consultant that will come in, help you set up what you need to do, and then teach you how to maintain it yourself. Okay, and that's one of the things I've always tried to do. Is I always say my job is to work myself out of a job.
Interesting.
And that is to go in there, help you set up what you need to do, show you guys how to do it, and then back away. And then you can call me if you need help. But basically, you have your system set up that you can handle it yourself.
Definitely. Give folks a fishing pole, right?
Exactly.
Help themselves. Certainly, that's great. Yeah. We will be having another poll at this moment. So the folks in the audience, you'll be seeing another question asked about exactly what we're talking about. Who is tackling your company's ISO push? So you'll see a variety of answers, and we love to hear where you guys are at with who perhaps is your consultant or how you're dealing with it. So we'll get to the answers in just a little bit when everybody's finished up answering. But major point that I think we're all dying to hear is those common mistakes. No one wants to go through an entire process and then find some major pitfalls, and there seems to be quite a few of them that are easy to...
Yeah, there's quite a few. To be very honest, when I get called into companies, almost every single time I see the same ISO 9000 mistakes, and I can almost predict it before I go in. And the main one is they over-document the processes. They make the processes so complicated and so over-documented that maintaining that becomes a nightmare. And following that becomes a nightmare. One of the keys that I've always told people when I go in to consult is I want to document the process with the process owner. Because if they don't understand and it isn't simple for them, then there's no point in doing it.
Right.
Okay, so that's the key. Documenting too many processes. People think that there's the high-level processes, there's the sub-level, and all the processes underneath, and that is true. But you do not have to document every single process in your company.
Okay.
You need to determine which ones are key.
And would a consultant determine those?
A consultant can help you do that because they'll understand the ISO standard more. Yeah, and hopefully understand quality systems in general.
Yeah. Because I think people's initial guts is I gotta document everything, and which is understandable. I mean, I know I certainly would be tackling that and documenting everything.
Exactly.
And I guess just to reiterate why documenting too many of them is a problem, why, at least from a consultant's point of view.
Yeah.
I guess someone might ask, well, why would that be a downfall? Yeah.
Yeah, I can absolutely speak to that. The downfalls of documenting too many processes is, one, it is impossible to maintain that. Because somebody has to maintain that, keep the records of that. When ISO first started, and I started doing this 25 years ago, some people were documenting, how employees went to the bathroom. I mean, it just got to the point of ridiculous.
Wash your hands.
And getting permit, it's just ridiculous. So, there's just certain things you just don't need to document.
Right.
You need to look at the processes that specifically affect your customers.
Okay.
That's the key.
Definitely.
And then, next mistake, which we talked about a little bit, lack of management support. If management doesn't buy into this, it will never, ever work. Okay?
Yeah.
And then lack of understanding of what's required. Do you really understand what the requirements of ISO are?
Yeah.
Most people interpret it to be much heavier than it really is.
Yeah. Don't overthink.
Yeah.
Don't overthink it.
And then the worst one is the lack of maintenance of the system.
Yeah.
It's nothing worse than when you actually get certified and then you start to lose it.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is usually one of the others is causing that. Usually you've over documented or documented too many processes that you can't maintain them.
Right. So in terms of maintaining the system, I suppose, how would it be discovered that somebody's failing on that part, on the maintenance? Is it, I assume unless you're actively involved in the company or working there, you wouldn't really notice kind of the ISO, your process quality going down, or?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about, say that one more time.
Yeah, no. I'm saying that,
I
I guess, like, if you're saying that the maintenance of it is usually something that, maybe somebody will drop the ball.
Yes.
Do folks check in on companies who are ISO certified just to make sure, hey, everything's up to
Absolutely,
to par?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I mean, you'll have suppliers that will come in and check on you, as well as the third-party certifying bodies that come and check once a year.
Yeah.
So, or as well as your internal audits.
Okay.
Just if you're doing your internal audits, you might find where stuff isn't getting maintained.
Yeah, pressure's on.
Yeah, and I always would address, not only getting it maintained, but why is it not getting maintained? Did you over document it?
Right.
Is it a process you didn't need to document? Those are the kind of questions you need to ask.
Absolutely. We do have another great question. So Shelly Green, thank you so much. She's curious about, especially since this is an international kind of standard we're talking about, she's curious about China. How do we know their audits, I presume those in the country of China, match the level of other countries?
Yeah, and I'm assuming I'm getting this question because the previous slide talked about how China has the most ISO certifications.
Yeah.
The reason that we know that they do match is because they're getting certified to the same standard. So this is ISO 9001, so everybody's looking at the exact same standard. So China's certifications are just like ours. Why are theirs higher than ours? Well, I would venture to guess because they are putting more focus in process improvement and quality.
Okay.
This happened years ago. Remember when Made in Japan meant that it was a bad product, and then all of that changed when W. Edwards Deming went over there and started setting up processes. He wanted to do that in America, but America didn't seem to want to listen. So all of a sudden, Made in Japan went from being bad quality to high quality. China is trying to do that very same thing.
Okay.
So that is why we are number 9, and China is number 1.
Oh, okay.
Interestingly enough, Britain, who started ISO in the first place, is I think number 7. So they've kind of dropped a little bit too. China's just really catching up.
Okay.
As they are in our economy, as we all can see.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, and Shelley's following up with just questioning kind of the reliability of their certification. I suppose in her experience, her company does deal with quite a number of Chinese companies who perhaps she's in her experience isn't seeing that quality being reflected in what an ISO would demand. So is there? I mean, are there discrepancies with reliability? Or
I mean, they're all operating to the same standard.
They are.
Now,
yeah.
I can't speak to who their certification body is.
Yeah.
So if they have a certification body that isn't very well recognized, I would look at that, because certification bodies, you want to pick one that's very reliable.
Right. Right.
Kind of the main one that started all this was BSI, which is British Standards Institute. But there's so many out there now. Over the last 20 years that even I can't keep track of all the certification bodies.
No,
but
certainly.
So yeah, I would question who the certification body is if you're not feeling that quality.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then did we have the poll results for who, I guess, again, who in the audience is using what to tackle your company's ISO push? And we had 4 different answers. It seems to be all fairly even keel. Internal quality got a 17%. Managers were the largest at 35. Outside consultants are 26, just taking the second, and employees 22. Is that kind of reflective of your experiences?
That is. I'm not real surprised at that. I will say that managers and employees need to have equal share in ISO implementation, but I'm not surprised at those numbers in any way. Internal quality seems a little low, but depending on the size of the company, they may not have an internal quality department.
Right, definitely.
So yeah, that does not surprise me.
Yeah, and again, you were saying, so the managers' employees should be a little bit more even?
They need to be working together.
Okay.
Employees can't do it without managers, and managers can't do it without employees.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. So here's another thing that we might ask ourselves is, do I really need ISO quality system? Is this something I actually really want to do? And you might get that a lot as a consultant.
Absolutely. I get this question a lot.
Yeah.
And here's my answer to that. If I took out the word ISO 9000 from that slide, and it says, do I really need a quality system?
Yeah.
You do. And if you're going to have since you need a quality system, why not make it ISO 9000 compliant? Just because you open up so many opportunities if you do.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yes, you do need a quality system, and you might as well, when you're setting one up, make it ISO 9000 compliant.
What is I guess when you find resistance to people saying, well, I don't really want to go through this whole rigmarole, I guess, what is their reasons? Is it the money? Is it the time? Perhaps all of it.
Yeah, it's all of it. A lot of people think this is more work. This is on top of my regular work. I'm already stretched, and trust me, I understand that.
Yeah.
If you're setting this up right, though, you should be able to actually streamline your work, so therefore you aren't as stressed. And yes, initially it can take a little extra time. I'm not going to deny that. But if you do it right, it should set you up so that you are much better set up going in the future, and it will actually reduce the amount of time you're currently spending on your work.
Yeah, so just bite the bullet, you guys.
Yeah.
And I love this, what you sent over when I asked JF in preparation for this crash course, asking the exact same question, well, can anybody get out of doing this? And I loved your responses. You do not need to do this whole project for these 4 points, if.
Exactly. And to be honest, I've stolen this from one of my flyers that I've sent out to companies.
Great.
Saying, why not hire me?
Right.
And you don't need any help if your organization makes more money than you can ever spend.
Yeah, we have that problem here.
Yeah, if you're too busy with your lunches with the Queen and Oprah and Bill Gates, and you can't fit that 15th Porsche into your garage. If everything is a leave it to Beaver type organization, you don't need this help. But trust me, I have never seen a company like this.
With all 4 of these, or maybe one of them.
Exactly.
Definitely.
Even companies that think that they're doing everything right, there's always room for improvement.
Certainly. Certainly.
Always.
Yeah.
And you can always save money. You can always, speed up your cycle time. You can always improve your quality.
Yeah.
there's always reasons for a management system.
Yeah, absolutely. And growth is certainly important for I think everyone here, whether it's small business, large business,
Exactly.
startup, whatever it is. Definitely.
Right.
Well, we wanted to open up the floor since these are we reached the 7 main points in our roadmap. Any questions for JF? I would say myself, but I'm not the consultant, so you don't want to hear my responses because I would just talk about Leave It to Beaver. But if anybody did have some last minute questions, JF, we're here to.
I'm happy to answer any questions anybody might have.
Yeah. And I guess my question is if there were some major takeaways that you really just want to drive home for everyone to, if you're going to remember something, I guess, what would it be?
I guess my major takeaway would be ISO 9000 is not as daunting as you think it is.
Yeah. Okay.
If you look at the standard, you're going to feel overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. But it's really not as daunting as it sounds.
Okay.
Every company I've ever worked with, we end up streamlining the processes to a point where everybody's looking at it as, oh my gosh, we should have done this from the get-go. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we should have done this when we were starting up our company, not after we've grown to 5,000 employees.
Yeah.
It's not as hard as it sounds. Mm-hmm. I also say the benefit of being ISO compliant is, to me, just as good as being ISO certified. If you need the certification, because your customers are demanding it, that's one thing.
Yeah.
And a lot of companies are, but just getting it to that point that quality management system is working, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The benefits are far exceed the cost.
Certainly. Yeah. Thank you so much. And we actually do want to direct folks, if you're kind of mulling over any other questions, or you wanted to go back to your folks in your company and talk a little bit about it and then come back and ask questions, we do have a fantastic page on Dozuki's site, dozuki.com/answers, ask. And since this is the workshop about ISO, it ends with ISO. And so this is a good space where both JF and I will be fielding some more of your questions, comments, or if you wanted to throw out some specific scenarios that you're dealing with right now and just wanted kind of a little guidance, or just, contact JF directly, that would be
absolutely.
great.
I'm happy to help. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Mm-hmm. Happy to do it.
Right, and we do have one last question that we did want to squeeze in there before our time is slowly running out. We've got a question from an audience member. What if you fail at your audits? That's probably something pretty scary for folks. Thank you, Michael, for asking that. That is something that I think I would be a little bit nervous about. Is what happens?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I'm glad you asked it. What happens if you fail your audit? Well, typically you won't just go from certification to failure.
Okay.
Typically what they will do is when they come in, they do a periodic audit, they will come in and say, these are the things that are not in compliance, mm-hmm. and then they give you a certain amount of time, whether it's 90 days, 180 days, it kind of depends. You can mm-hmm. actually negotiate that between you to get that stuff fixed.
Okay.
So
mm-hmm.
you have the opportunity to fix it so that you don't lose your certification. That's mm-hmm. why I tell people, don't be afraid. Don't think you have to hide your non-compliances. The auditors are there to help you. Mm-hmm. They don't mm-hmm. want you to lose your certification.
Yeah.
So if you're getting close to losing it, they're going to tell you what you need to do
mm-hmm.
to fix it.
Great.
They're going to tell you what's wrong and give you enough time to fix it.
Great. So there is hope. Don't worry. If you fail, try again.
Yeah, exactly.
We also have another one from Shelly Green. A very interesting question. I suppose her company recently found out that we need a CE mark, and it's too bad that if one had ISO 900, it seems like this should override the needs for this. And so I'm actually not sure what a CE mark is. If perhaps you know, Jeff?
I actually don't know what a CE mark is either, mm-hmm, so I'm sorry mm-hmm. about that.
She says they are dealing with the U.S. military, and while they do have some MS specs, she's told that even the U.S. Gov is moving towards recognizing ISO.
I wondered if it was like a UL certificate.
Yeah, that sounds very, very niche in terms of the industry.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah, mm-hmm. No, I understand what it is. Yeah,
right.
Wonder if there is to move towards some standards. Mm-hmm. I agree with you. It would be nice if we were all using one standard. Unfortunately, I don't have control over that, but no. But more and more I am seeing, mm-hmm. I mean, ISO is an international standard, but yeah, there are other standards like UL and CE depending on if you're dealing with military or electrical.
Right.
So.
Yeah. So definitely. So that might be something to go towards a specialized consultant for that, or
absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely. And
Great.
I wish I had a better answer for that one.
No, there's a lot of different. Again, like we said, this is a massive field to talk about, to try to cram into a little less than an hour. And like you said, there's families in these industries. There seems like a whole network going on. But yeah, and so again, kind of just going back on the small company, Shelley just had another question for us. For small companies, what if they can't afford to meet it all? Is it, in terms of budgets, I'm sure you have to talk about finances quite a bit.
Right, we get that a lot. And I understand, but my thing is, it shouldn't, the smaller you are, the less money it should cost. Mm-hmm. So it shouldn't cost too much money initially. If it does, then I would question whether or not it's worth it,
right.
Or whether or not that requirement is realistic.
Mm-hmm.
But typically your benefit from doing it exceeds the cost.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It shouldn't cost much up front, depending on the size of your company.
Okay.
And you can do so much internally just with your own people.
Right, definitely. Well, great. So thank you so much. We're going to close up on these questions, and as we get them trickling in continuously, again, we'll be fielding the questions at the URL just behind us. So feel free to jot that down and type it into the forum. You might get some great answers, not just from JF and myself, but also the community at large, since there's some really great information floating around on our forum today. And then also, again, feel free to contact JF or myself. Our emails and phone numbers are down below, and we'd be happy to help anybody with more details and things like that. And so so thank you so much, JF.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
And
we will hope to see you for the next Dozuki workshop installment. But
sounds good.
Thank you very much, and you guys have a great rest of your week.
Thank you very much.
Bye.